Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. and tonight we're talking about some of the remarkable father figures and surprising father figures we may have seen in the show over its many years. But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Hansi.
Hi, I'm Hansi Oppenheimer of Squee Projects, and I'm a filmmaker and writer and general artist and huge Supernatural fan.
Very good. Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Malcolm, the director of the Urban Fantasy Track at DragonCon, and we cover Supernatural on the track. When the track was formed, they took it from the track that used to cover it and gave it to me. So, and I have been a longtime fan. I mean, I watched it since the beginning because my very first, hopefully Gail won't mind me mentioning this, but my very first I guess you could say fandom was for Buffy, and the way that Supernatural was pitched was it's like Buffy but with boys, and I thought, well, okay, we'll give it a try. So I did watch it from the actual beginning, and I'm happy to always get to cover it on the track. And we also have, which Gail was part of, on my track YouTube channel. It started during the pandemic. It took us a couple of years because I had to take some months off to do things getting ready for con, but we did what we call Supernatural Rewind, and we did a season a month, and those are all on our YouTube channel, but we'll talk about that later. But Gail was part of that, for which I appreciate.
It was a lot of fun. Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Wicker, and I came late to the Supernatural world, but dived right in, and I've been a fan ever since, and have done numerous rewatches and gone to 2 fan conventions now. So I'm getting to be a pro about that. I'm a former editor, and I'm a former newspaper person. I'm now an editor, writer, and I edit books for people, and I watch a lot of Supernatural, and I'm happy to be here to talk about the father figures.
Angelique.
Hi, I'm in New Zealand, and I'm a full-time fiction writer. I also study pop culture, in particular queer representation, academically. My master's is on Dean Winchester. I discovered the Supernatural show in the end of 2015 when my then 15-year-old daughter talked me into watching it. She said, yeah, come on, I poured the wine. You're going to like this, And I wasn't that fussed on the opening credits or scenes, and then we all know what happened. He walked on the screen and said, Dad's on a hunting trip. That was the end of my life. It's been Dean Winchester ever since.
And I also came late to Supernatural. I fell in love with it halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months for the start of season 12, and have been an obsessed fan ever since. Just here on Continual, we have done over 180 Supernatural panels since the start. And then also it's been fun to be part of the panels for Carol over at DragonCon, and I run a Supernatural fan group here on Facebook, so I love Supernatural and every opportunity to watch it, talk about it, and just basically geek out over it. So father figures, for a show that is very much about family, we have a variety of father figures: good, bad, awful, better, surprising, unconventional. But let's start with John Winchester and his A+ parenting, because it all starts with John. So thoughts about John? Hansi?
I see John more as a flawed parent than a bad parent. I don't think he was trying to be abusive. I think he was mentally ill and couldn't cope, but he never just left those kids anywhere. He kept bringing them to the hunt. You know, I mean, he wanted them in his life. But, you know, he was obviously had his own issues, you know, not only from the military, but from losing his wife this way. So I think he was a damaged parent, but I don't think he was a bad father, as bad as people tend to stigmatize him.
Okay, Carol.
I don't know that I guess I'm somewhere in between. I don't find that I don't think he was the worst that they could have had, but I don't think he was a particularly good father. By that, uh, you know, I think it was bad enough that he did drag them around most of the time, but he did also leave them. There was the one episode which I can't remember which
They
season
left
it
him at
was,
the
where we
school and
yeah.
yeah.
And you know, and I mean, granted, it wasn't as though they were, you know, like 5 and 8 at the time. They were a little bit older, but I think my objection to what he did was that he let that overriding obsession with what he thought he was going to do was to go after the demon that killed his wife at the expense of being a father to the kids that were left behind. And you know, I that is the objection I've always had to him, is that he chose that over them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anne?
Well, I think I sort of agree with both of you, because I think he was flawed. I don't think he meant to be a bad parent. He was flawed, and he was damaged by the way his wife died, and also by all of a sudden finding out that all those bad things are out there and they're out to get you. And his way of compensating was he knew the military, but he never, you know, Henry Winchester disappeared from his life when he was what, 10? So he never had a really strong father figure. And then he got to the military, and that was the only way he felt that he could cope, was by teaching his sons to take care of themselves. I mean, that line where, you know, Sam says he was afraid of monsters under the bed, and John gave him a gun. You know, and
Perfectly logical reaction. Yeah.
and to John, that was logical.
Yeah.
But to any other parent, that's horrifying. And to us, you know, but I think that he did you know, I know we talk about his A+ parenting, but in a way he did the best he could with what he understood. So I think you're right, Hansi. I think flawed might be, you know, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's very true.
Angelique?
I agree with Anne. I think he was a product of his upbringing and his existence, for want of a better word. You know, Henry had just vanished. Who's to say what his presence would have molded him into or not molded him into? Throw in the military on top of that, and what happened to Mary, and it was just, you know, a perfect storm of awful things. And this man, who in real terms was quite young, is suddenly there with not just a 4-year-old, but a 6-month-old baby. And he can't say to anybody without sounding like a complete, you know, nutcase, the demon killed my wife. So, you know, there was all this stuff that fed into it. My objection to his parenting as he went along is that he didn't seem to learn from mistakes very well until it was too late. But he was so hard on Dean, and I know I have a soft spot for Dean, but I don't think he was particularly fair on Sam, but he rode Dean from such a young age. From the moment he placed Sam in his arms and said, take care of him, that was the overriding. There was never a moment where he softened toward this little boy who lost his mother.
Well, that could be considered, abusive.
And
Giving a
yeah.
small child that much like responsibility.
Yeah. And it was just this, no, Dean, you've got to, we learned that when Dean was too much for what John could cope with, he would dump him somewhere. And Dean would always, we all know that heartbreaking moment when he's got the chance to stay at the boys' home and have a normal life, that he sees Sam in the back window of the Impala and he goes, no, I gotta go. That's what breaks my heart about John's A+ parenting, is that it stole that from Dean.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly on the flawed piece. And one thing that I liked in the Winchesters, even though I know it is AU and not completely canon, is that we did get to see that version of John dealing with PTSD from Vietnam. And it kind of just gets glossed over. Oh yeah, John was in Vietnam. John was a Marine in Vietnam. That had to have messed with his head to start with. So he came back damaged. And then his wife's killed horrifically. And in a way that, as we've said, there's no support group for my wife burned to death on the ceiling from a demon. So it's got to take him a while before he finds Bobby and before he finds out about hunting. He's got 2 kids that he doesn't know what to do with because fathers at that era were not necessarily taught how to be caregivers. And we don't know how early in the whole thing he finds out about the demon blood with Sam. So now he's got this worry at some point about Sam, not only for Sam, but of Sam. What's this, is my child going to be a serial killer? Is he going to be the Antichrist? And what about what it means for Sam? So he's keeping this heavy secret. And I think we see a lot of the toxic masculinity of his era, that he doesn't know how to talk about these things. He doesn't know how to communicate with his children or ever say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I don't know. He just yells. He's scared to let Sam go, so he cracks down harder on Sam, which is even worse, and just accelerates Sam's departure. And I think those of us who kind of grew up in this period all see parts of things we grew up with. Yeah, I know how that's going to work out for you. Not so good. But I think he was not exceptional for his era of having figured these things out. And so we do get to finally see him in Lebanon show how much he's proud of his boys. He says he's proud of them. He says he loves them. He mends fences with Sam. And, Jeffrey Dean Morgan has said that he has always believed that John Winchester loved his boys the best he knew how to love them, which wasn't perfect, but that he did the best he knew how to do. So interesting, flawed, complex, but hey, that's what makes a good character. Now we've also got Bobby, who has his own backstory that he had to
his father. I mean, Bobby's father is like the ultimate bad take
it away, Hansi, start us off.
Yeah, so Bobby's father is like the worst father ever, abusing his mother, and Bobby basically has to kill his father and he has to live with that. And then Bobby, because of that trauma, becomes like the best father you could be to these 2 boys. I think he really did. He was dad, for so many characters, not just Sam and Dean, but I think for a lot of the younger characters.
Carol?
Well, I mean, who doesn't love Bobby? If anybody out there doesn't love Bobby, don't tell me, because I can't believe that people like that exist. I think everybody, just has to, uh, you know, admire him for, I mean, whether you just enjoyed his quips or, whatever the case may be, I think, but, when you were, Hansi, was talking about, when we learn what his background was in terms of what he went through, I mean, prior to that episode, he might make a comment about it or something, but we didn't really have a whole lot of context for it until we see what he actually went through. And to think that he managed to turn out the way he did in spite of that was pretty great. That's not something that I'm sure was easy for him to deal with psychologically himself. But even if it had to be done, even if it was done in self-defense, even if, I mean, all the reasons that it happened for, and for him to be able to become the really loving person that he was, not just to Sam and Dean, but to all of the other hunters that he dealt with, especially, as you said, the younger ones. I think that, that is, kudos to him for being able to get past that, terrible background in order to, be the complete opposite for these people when they need it, even when they're idiots.
And
Well, one of my favorite scenes was when Bobby and very young Dean are walking across a field, and they have baseball gloves, and Dean is saying, but Dad said we had to practice with the shotgun or something, and Bobby says, no, you're gonna be a little boy today. We're gonna
Yeah.
toss a ball around, however he put it. And so it's almost like, Bobby is set up to be the counterpoint to John the trainer, John the disciplinarian, John who wouldn't really let them be boys, especially Dean, as one of you pointed out. Dean was given the responsibility to take care of Sammy, and so Bobby lets them be boys, lets them be young, and yet he also, disciplines them and gives them what for from time to time. I just watched Weekend at Bobby's today.
Oh yeah,
and, and there's that one scene where he says, get Sam in there and put him on speaker, and then he just reams out both of them out for being selfish and not responding to their needs after he's broken into a library to get a book they needed, and he's done all this stuff, and it just is, he's the counterpoint, and but he loves them, and he wouldn't say those things if he didn't love them. And I think that's part of what was the problem with John. One of the problems with John was he didn't communicate with them. He ordered them around. He didn't say, look, this is what I need you to do because there are monsters out there and they're real, and you need to be able to shoot. You need to be able to take care of yourselves. He didn't present it in such a way that he just ordered them to do this. But that was his military training. And Bobby had military training too, but he was not, it didn't rack the same way.
I think sometimes too, people who grow up with abusive parents do everything they can not to be that.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Angelique?
I loved Bobby from the start because in my family, we have a lot of adoption. So I have his famous, family day needs a flood. Because in my family, that's a big deal. So he stole my heart immediately. As far as I was concerned, the minute he uttered those words, he was Dad. That was it. You can argue with me all you like. He was Dad. But for me, one of the things that really stood out about Bobby is that awful moment when he's dying and he's going back to his memories. And the memory for him that is the best, that is kept for last, isn't his wife, it isn't something he did, it isn't even the boys being heroic. It's the boys being dumbass brothers on the sofa watching a movie. And I thought at the time, I can never watch that scene without crying, because it's such a loving father thing to have, as save the best for last. You know, that's the thing he wants to remember. And I think for the boys, a very telling thing is that when Dean arrives in heaven, the first person he meets is not one of his parents. It is not John. It's Bobby. You know, that's who meets him in his afterlife. And I think that tells us what Dean thought of Bobby as a father figure. You know, he was the person that was represented, not John, despite having mended those fences in Lebanon.
Yeah. I have to laugh at what Anne said about Bobby, calling them on the carpet and cussing them out. These are the guys that monsters are afraid of. These are the guys who have busted heaven and hell. And does that make Bobby hold back at all, that it is Sam and Dean Winchester that he's reaming out? No, he's just going to talk to them like a couple of bad boys. And so, you got to love that. You got to love him for that. All of the things that everybody has said, there is beneath the gruffness, there's a gentleness with Bobby that I think comes through and that resonated with Sam and Dean. And I think we see that come through later on when they have a chance, when they have to step into parental roles. I think they learned what they learned from Bobby. And so, we see glimmers of those things when they are acting as parents. And I think that also Bobby helped lift some of the burden of the parentification that John put on Dean. At least when they were at Bobby's, Dean wasn't completely responsible for everything and could breathe a little easier. Sure, he was still watching out for Sam, but he wasn't solely responsible the way he was the other times. And so that, I'm sure he never let Sam out of his sight. I'm sure he protected Sam even, at Bobby's, but he had a little breathing room. And I think that would have been something that was very important.
Yeah, he had somebody else that he could rely on who had the same goal.
And who understood his, crazy past. And
well, and we get the impression, certainly it comes up a lot in fanfic, but I think there are ramifications of it there in some of the things that get said in the show, that one of the big fears was that Child Protective Services would come in and take the boys away from John. That somebody would find out that these two boys were living in a motel without a parent, that somebody at school would start asking questions about why do you always have bruises? And so I think that that's something that when they were with Bobby, they didn't have to worry about. And that would have been something that John would have worried about, but it certainly was something that Dean worried about because he didn't want to get separated from Sam. So that was, again, something that Bobby was an important pillar of support for. Now, we didn't get to see much of Henry. He's only in 2 episodes. We do get his presence is more significant in the Winchesters than in Canon Supernatural, but we do pick up some interesting glimmers there. Let's talk about Henry. I love the quote about as long as he's a he's a Winchester, he's already cursed, but there's also, as long as there's a Winchester, there's hope. So you've got kind of two sides of the coin. Hansi, what about Henry?
I love Henry. Henry was a really interesting character. I love the whole Men of Letters thing because it just added such a different element to this, and it created this whole new world that we could explore with, you know, all the magic books and arcane and stuff. I loved it. I think Henry was a good guy, but I mean, did anybody know what he was doing? Like, was Men of Letters just completely secret? There's so many questions with him. I think that's you know, he seemed like a good dad, but because it seemed like, right, he tucks him in, he kisses him goodnight, and then he disappears, but that's not his fault. And then when he does be back with Sam and Dean, there's this bond there that you can feel. And it felt good. I think their relationship, they felt, you know, they messed with each other a little, but you know, who doesn't needle each other in your family?
My grandfather fell out of a closet, and that's how I met him. Yeah.
Surprise.
Carol?
Yeah, I always thought that you know, that Henry was an interesting character because he didn't fit the mold of some of the other fathers that we had seen previous to that. But since we didn't really get a whole lot of his backstory in Supernatural, you know, it was hard to say, okay, well, you know, what really makes this guy tick, aside from the fact that he was you know, he was part of Men of Letters, and as Gail pointed out, getting to see, you know, his character, even just briefly there, but you did hear a little bit more about him and see him a little bit more in the Winchesters. That was a good way to kind of give us that information, even though, as you point out, it was the, you know, alternate universe kind of thing. So I don't know. I thought he was very interesting. I was like Hansi. I always thought the Men of Letters was a fascinating you know, concept, and people might throw stuff at me, but I did actually enjoy the British Men of Letters counterpoint to that. I thought that contrast was actually very good. And you know, the fact that for Sam and Dean to realize that they had kind of a different role event, I mean, that they were legacies of a different role in addition to hunting, kind of added to what they could do, because they had always relied on both research and, you know, beat them up and ask questions, or, you know, sometimes, you know, just beat them up, whatever, or kill them. But I mean, you know, they did. Even Dean would do research as opposed to just you know, hunting stuff and beating things up. So I think that it probably, for them, it kind of made them feel as though, oh well, this makes a little more sense now, you know, that they had both of those roles coming to them.
Okay.
And John had that amazing book. I mean, that he was
Right.
an amazing tracker, plus the Men of Letters. So
Right.
Anne?
Yeah, I think that Henry really regretted, you know, that he disappeared out of John's life, hearing what happened with Sam
Right.
and Dean and being aware of that. But at the same time, there was nothing else he could have done, given the circumstances with the Men of Letters at that time. And he just I just thought they did a really good job with him, you know, trying to use the phone and you know, trying to adjust to all of that. But then he introduced Sam and Dean to all this other arcane knowledge from the Men of Letters, which, as Hansi pointed out, that was fascinating to me too. And Sam's happy as a clam with his own library now.
Right,
So,
right.
anyway, I just really think that he was glad to be able to help his grandsons if he could not go back and be with his son and be a father to his son. And I think he was really glad to help his grandsons in the end.
Okay, Angelique?
I've always sort of wondered about what would have happened if these boys had been brought up with their grandfathers there, given how different their grandfathers are to one another.
Oh gosh.
And we've got a hunter on this hand, and we've got a man of letters on this hand. And I can't remember off the top of my head. Yes, I have to turn in my card. If it was Henry or somebody else who said that, but hunters are Neanderthals, basically. And logic,
Yeah, it was another one. Yeah.
And logic kind of dictates that given that background, maybe Dean was destined to be a hunter and Sam a man of letters, which I think is a bit unfair because, as you said, Anne, Dean's as much of a researcher as Sam is. But how different would their lives have been had they had these two really oppositional grandfathers feeding into that?
Well, God forbid if they'd been with Campbell, because
Yeah.
he's a
I'm
monster.
sure he's on your list, Gail, because I agree.
Well, and I think, and again, drawing from what we saw of Henry and his legacy in the Winchesters, I was very impressed with the way they wrote it in. What was the whole thing about being a mechanic and a car and loving the cars and all that? Well, that came from Millie, John's mom, because John's dad was gone. So that makes sense that's where John got his love of cars, his ability to be a mechanic, which he passed to Dean. The idea that Henry was progressive enough in his thinking and not tied to gender roles of his era to fall in love with somebody who runs a garage. Millie was not your conventional 1950s, 1960s wife. And that made it all the more interesting and spoke to me that Henry could think out of the box and that he wasn't so much a product of his time. And so I wish we could have gotten to see more of him. But he was, what we got to see was pretty good and certainly set things up for, much more of the character development for the boys. Now, we also get an unlikely father figure in Garth, with his little werewolf pups. Thoughts about Garth as a dad?
Obviously a wonderful dad, just the way he got that little kid to talk with his Mr. Sock puppet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
the dentist. So he actually started out kind of flaky, but then ended up being really strong and a good dad, I think.
I mean, becoming a werewolf might have been one of the best things that could have happened to him.
right.
Because, it just, I couldn't imagine him being a dentist. Then he's a dentist. But I didn't understand until that whole scene. It didn't really register with me that he had been in dental school, apparently, when he discovered stuff about, when he discovered that demons and werewolves and things are real. And then, so I think Garth really made the most out of what happened to him. And I think Gail's point, or somebody's point about that Bobby was a father figure to others, I think Bobby was a father figure to Garth too.
Oh yeah, he makes that point. Yeah.
There's that
He-
whole
he
scene
gets
where
down.
Dean is annoyed at him for like, sort of mourning him. And, Garth's like, hey, it's not just you're not the only one who's mourning him.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you aren't the only one. It's not just you guys that lost him. We all did.
Yeah.
There's something to
Yeah.
that effect. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it. We didn't get to see a lot of him as a father, but except in that one episode. But the fact that when you think about his relationship with the guys, it was more like, to me, he was he was serving to them as another brother, or a cousin that they didn't, because he did, after time progressed, he didn't have any trouble uh calling them to the carpet, so to speak, or pointing out something that they were doing that was wrong. And it always floors me. I love the character, I love the actor, and it always floors me when I um discovered this, but he was only physically in 7 episodes of the whole show. And for him to be such a huge presence, because they talked about him all the time. Sometimes he was on the phone, they would have a conversation about him, or, well, Garth said, whatever. But I think that that's a tribute to the character and to the actor, that in just those many episodes, that he could have such a huge impact, on the show. And I think that his becoming a werewolf also, and showing how you could be still a loving person with your family, with his wife, and the kids were twins, weren't they? Weren't they the
Yes.
same age?
Mm.
Yeah.
The
And
boys were twins.
yeah, and the fact that that he could do that, I think, kind of helped further that theory that had been being kind of pushed along over the years, or that kind of evolved, about not all monsters are monsters.
Mhm.
And Garth was one of those that I think really helped, for Sam and Dean to say, yeah, that really is true.
I think
Okay.
he taught them too that being a hunter wasn't necessarily all about the macho masculinity,
Right.
Great point.
any of that. He was not what either of them considered a hunter in typical terms. And I think he taught them how that it was okay to be a bit softer around the edges, that you could still be all these other things, but
Right.
have that softer, more encompassing part to you.
Yeah, that there are also other ways to get the kinds of information that they.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
Did we pick everybody up on this one? Because I know we ended up jumping around. Anne, did you get a chance to say?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So Sam and Dean got a chance to be father figures. Dean not only got a chance, Dean not only raised Sam, but we also got to see him with Ben. We got to see him many times with child witnesses like Lucas, where he really was able to make a good connection to the children. Sam, we got to see with Dean Jr. What about Sam and Dean as parents, Hansi?
I think they both were incredible with children. They were both really, really good with children. They were always trying to protect them, and Dean, that was always one of the really sweet things. He showed this soft side when he was, with a kid. I don't know if he could be a father because of the situation, the hunting, unless he gave up the hunting, whereas Sam was willing to give that up to have a family. I'm assuming. We don't know. But I think they were great with kids. I don't know if Dean could do it for the long haul,
Mm.
Although
Okay.
he did love mowing the lawn in that whole world there he was in for a little while.
Well, he did it for the long haul with Sam, though.
Right. That's true.
Mhm. Karen?
Yeah, I think that, especially when it comes to Dean, thinking about him uh, as an adult, somehow I think that he related well. That if you think about the two guys going in to talk to, whoever they're pretending to be, going in to talk to potential witnesses or
Teddy
suspects
bear
or whomever,
inspectors.
yeah, whoever, that, you know, the joke was always kind of that, well, Sam was usually better, at handling people, or, and the Dean was not, but Dean was always better with the kids. And I think that part of it was because he probably could see Sam as a child and what some of the stuff they had to deal with, when they're having to, you know, deal with these kids who have just been traumatized by whatever. So I think that, in his case, he he would have been afraid, in a way,
Well,
even though he
Bobby
did
was,
try it briefly.
I mean, Bobby was afraid to have his own children because of
Right.
his father. So,
Right. Well, I think in Dean's case, it was more he was worried about the lifestyle.
right.
I mean, that was always the feeling I had, was that, he worried about both Lisa and Ben because of that. And, but I did find it interesting that he did seem to, relate so well to kids. But I think it's because he was able to zero in on, okay, I was a kid once that had to deal with this. And so, he could speak to them kind of on that level, but also the fact that he had to help someone who was a kid when he was still a kid himself. And I think that all of those experiences came to him. As far as Sam goes, I think for Sam, it was just that, he, for the most part, always tended to be pretty empathetic for whoever he was, actually dealing with. But I don't recall that we got to see him really that much in the role, of a father. Not that I can recall, anyway.
Not really until the last, the
Right.
finale.
Right.
Well, he was more of, he defended and was more, defended and was more, acted more like a father figure to Jack.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Than Dean did. Dean was, kind of standoffish with Jack and really didn't seem to, for all Dean could relate to all you said, Carol, about Dean relating to different children and all through the show, and identifying with the children, being able to communicate without talking down to them. He was so good at that. But there was something about Jack that, he didn't really connect with Jack at all.
He didn't trust him, was
No.
what it meant,
Yeah, and Sam, but Sam felt like that there was good in Jack, and he sort of took over from Cassiel, being the father figure for Jack in many ways, I think. And then of course we got to see him parent his own child, Dean Jr., in those flashes in the one episode. But it just, I wonder sometimes about if Dean would have wanted his own children, but he considered Ben his own, and that was
Right.
a continuation.
That was
of
such a
Bobby.
tease.
Yeah. But that was also a continuation of the Bobby attitude.
Angelique?
I always thought it was interesting that when they go to, sorry, it's been one of those days, when they go to Jodie's house, and the girls are there, and she starts to lecture them about sex, and the boys both go,
yeah.
yeah, why are we involved in this conversation? There's this sudden moment where they don't want to be a part of a grown-up conversation. That's not what they do. Even though we see them with those same girls, effectively, especially Dean when he marches her off with the boyfriend and says,
Claire?
no, the brunette. My brain is on holiday today. I'm sorry. When Claire says to him, you know, they're going to go up to the cabin, and he gives the boyfriend a warning, a very much dad warning. You know, he's very much in dad mode with those same girls when he's out there with his suit on and, you know, hey, behave yourself and don't do this, don't do that. But when it's actually being a dad, completely freaked out. And when I first watched it, I thought, oh, well, go. They never would have had that talk. Can you imagine John Winchester giving those two the talk? But my gut says that he gave Sammy the talk. God help us all.
He probably just showed him some porn.
Yeah, exactly. So my point is that he's uncomfortable with that kind of close, almost touchy-feely, for want of a better word, parenting, because he didn't get it. You know, he didn't have any of that from John, or even from Bobby, who was gruff and things. So I think that I agree, he probably wouldn't have had children, because I think he probably would have been too scared to. What if I turn out like my dad? What if I can't do things like talk about sex?
Or if they become bait, right?
Yeah. What if there's a monster, and instead of protecting them, I teach them how to do this, and I yell at them like Dad yelled at me, and you know, and he's had a lifetime of raising Sam. I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I've had a lifetime of raising my kids, and I'm pretty tired. I don't want to start all over again. And he's been doing it since he was 4. You know,
Yeah.
I suspect he wants to rest.
I think both Dean and Sam, when they had the opportunity to be in a parental role, whether it was their own child or not, but a child they were caring for, I think they both tried to do better than was done for them. And I think we kind of see that, even if it isn't said straight out, because we see Dean cutting some corners with Sam that John wouldn't have let them cut. And we see Sam, both when he was with Jack and with Adam, before they found out Adam was Ghoul. And, you know, we saw him explaining things as opposed to just giving orders. And so I think that both of them tried very hard when they were in that role to do better than was done to them. And you know, that's kind of the crux of the whole thing. Well, folks, we have blown through our time, and we never even got to Chuck, our father, who's in heaven, or Crowley, who tried to raise Amora. So those things, yes, there he is. We have summoned him.
He's been summoned.
Crowley, the crazy uncle.
And he also had a real child.
Yeah, Gavin.
Gavin.
So we will have to come back and revisit this, but for now, let's let everybody tell us where we can find you online. Hansi?
At Squee Projects on everything: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc.
Okay, Carol?
Yes, if you go to Facebook and just put in DragonCon Urban Fantasy, it will take you right to the track page, which does stay active pretty much all year. We also have a YouTube channel on which you can find all of those 15 Supernatural Rewind episodes from 2021 and 22, and a number of other things as well. Last year we did a Buffy watch. Upcoming this year, before the year is over, next month on December 4th, we have a discussion over the Slayers Audible drama.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, and then and these are live, so people can interact as well. And then on the 13th, we will begin revisiting Lost Girl every month. So that'll be season 1 on December 13th. So I hope people will come check us out.
Awesome. And
I'm on Facebook a lot under Ann Wicker, and I'm also on the Team Free Will North Carolina that group that Gail runs, and here on Continual. And you can also find me on Instagram and Twitter under Ann Wicker, and just look for the bracelets as the profile photo.
okay. Angelique.
You can find me everywhere under my name, because I'm the author who forgot to get a pen name. And if it's not there, then you can find me on my website, angeliquejurd.com.
Okay. I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. I'm on most of the social medias under one or both of those names. So if you spell them right, you'll find me. I do run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook. I'm a columnist for the Winchester Family Business blog, but most of the time I'm here on Continual. So thank you all so much for being here. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon on Continual. So we'll see you online.